Good evening. My name is Paul Powell, and I am conducting an interview for the Veterans History Project. And today is June the 9th, 2024, and we are in McDonough, Georgia. Can you please state your full name?
My full name is Lewis Powell, no middle name.
And where were you born?
I was born in Churchland, Virginia.
So, can you tell me a little bit about Churchland?
Churchland was a segregated community just outside of Portsmouth, but it's now been incorporated into Portsmouth. And it was a fairly small community, but a fairly tight-knit community.
Okay. So, can you tell me a little bit more about the community?
Well, the community had probably, I would say it was probably about a half-mile square across, and with about 8 or 9 streets. And at the time, the streets were not paved. They were all dirt or gravel with ditches on one side. So we spent time just playing in the streets. There were no playgrounds. And so we got a chance to just run around and get to know your neighbors, and all neighbors knew each other.
Wow. So it was a really tight community.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And can you tell me a little bit about your parents?
My parents, James and Myrtle. My dad professionally was an auto mechanic. My mother was a homemaker. And my dad also, a little bit later on in his life, after I was probably about 10 years old, became an ordained minister. And he pastored a couple of churches in the area, one initially in Lawrenceville, Virginia, which was about 50 miles away from Churchland, and after that in Norfolk, Virginia, which was basically in the neighborhood, probably about 15 miles away. So they were great parents, and we had, in total, I had 4 brothers and 4 sisters.
Wow, so that's a fairly large family.
Yes.
So was that considered a large family for the time?
Well, I would think so. You know, there were other families that had similar-sized families, but at that time, this was really during World War II, continuing on into the Korean War time, and that was not unusual for families to be large.
Okay. And so, can you tell me a little bit about your siblings?
Well, as I say, I have 4 brothers, had 4 brothers, and 4 sisters. Now I'm down to 3 of each, because 2 of them are deceased, 1 sister and 1 brother. My siblings, we range from age of, well, I have a sister who's 10 years older than myself, and a brother who is 11 years younger. So there's a full spectrum there. You're talking about 20 plus years of siblings. And we have, all of us, all of the boys particularly, have served in the military, one branch or another. And my sisters, 2 served in the military.
So what branches did they serve in?
Well, I have a sister who served in the Marine Corps, another sister who was in the Army, but mostly reserve. I think it was hers. I have a brother who retired as a light colonel Air Force. A brother who's now deceased was a warrant officer. A brother who was a sergeant in the Army. Later on, he joined the Air National Guard, and I think he was a sergeant there as well. And one who's a chief petty officer in the Navy. And I was Navy, in case you want to know. and after 10 years of active duty, 11 years total Navy time, I got out of the Navy as a 03, which is a Navy lieutenant.
Okay. Wow. So that's a pretty heavy military family background.
Yes.
So what kind of made you and your siblings join the military?
The right thing to do. To put it bluntly, yes. The expectation really was when we reached a certain age, generally graduation from high school, that one either went to college or went in the military. That was the expectation. Even though my father was too young for World War I and too old for World War II, he never had a problem about any of us being in the military. And my mother just prayed every day that none of us lost our lives while in the military, which it did not happen.
Wow. So did that feeling, did it go throughout Churchland, or was it just kind of like within the family?
Well, there are quite a number of people in Churchland who were in the military, who ended up going to the military. I can't speak for them totally, but I just know of a few who were in one branch of the service or the other. Now, because of the age differences, the span, I did not get to know some of the younger ones who were in the military. I know there are a couple of who were in my age group who were in the military, and we just sort of lost touch with each other over the years.
Okay.
But I went in after college. That's the difference.
You're like college first, then I can go do the
College
military and
first,
do the
and
other
then-
things.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. So how did each sibling feel about the other siblings joining the military?
I think they were fine. There's always a few jokes every once in a while about the branches of service because we spanned many different branches. I think we were in just about every branch except the Coast Guard.
Wow. Yeah, that is definitely notable. And what schools did you attend? Like, elementary school, high school, college?
Elementary school was at a county school. When I first went to elementary school, it was basically I went first and third grade in one building, which there was only one building, and fourth and fifth grade at another location, which only had fourth, fifth grade, and back to the one building for sixth grade. And that's elementary. And after that, a new high school was built for people of color on the other side of the county. And I can name the high school, Crestwood High School. So I ended up going there for 7th through 12th.
Wow. So what about college?
College, Maryland, University of Maryland.
Why Maryland?
Because I never wanted to go to school in my home state.
Why is that?
I just was an adventurous person. I had been accepted at 13 different colleges, but I could not afford much more than just going one state out. Just even affording the bus fare would have been a burden on the family.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, so you were like that independent spirit. You said, hey, look, I just got to get out of here. I'll go as far as I can go. And then...
Well, I'd spent 6 years with my high school classmates, and after that, many of them went to school within the state. And I said, I need a different experience. So it was a different experience.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So then, what did you do after college?
Well, after college, well, let me back up just a little bit. While I was still in college,
Mm-hmm.
this was during the time of draft, not the numbered draft, but this was county drafts that people just came in and you went to the county and you went before a draft board and they decided whether or not you went into the military or not. These were not numbered. It was not the lottery that followed later.
Okay. Wow. Now, can you talk about that a little bit more? Because I've never really heard that much about a local draft versus the draft for like Vietnam, where it's like kind of like
No, it's a draft board. Anytime anyone reached 18, the draft board would call you in, interview you, and many times you'd just be enlisted right then if you were physically fit and able to serve. And what was happening was that many times the members of the draft board were local officials, and I dare say in this case, all one white. They were all white.
Mm-hmm.
So many of the young men who were drafted were men of color. There's one way to get them out of the neighborhood, get them out of the community. And but I was in college, getting ready to enter my final year, 4 years of college, and I'd been approached by the colonel at my college who was head of the Air Force ROTC. I did not go into advanced ROTC because they said that I had a heart murmur for the Air Force. But I ran track 4 years of college. So it gives you, I never had a problem there. And so the colonel came to me one day as I was walking across the campus and said, Mr. Powell, the Navy is sending some people up here recruiting officers for the Navy, and I think you should go and talk to them. And I said to him, nah, forget it, I'm not interested. This is September of 1993. So he saw me again the following day and said, I think you really should. So I gave in and said, okay, Colonel, I'll show up. I'll come over, talk to them. And I did. I took their brief exam, which I did well on. And they said, well, we're going to fly you or take you to Andrews Air Force Base in Washington, D.C., and get a physical and so forth. And I'd say, well, the Air Force didn't want me because I had a heart murmur. Navy said, not a problem. So I enlisted that September, 9 months before I graduated, in an inactive reserve with the intent of, as soon as I graduated, I was going to go off to active duty training boot camp, more or less, for officers candidates in Pensacola, Florida, which was going to be Navy aviation. And I did. In 1964. November of 1964, I received my commission in the Navy as an ensign.
Wow. That's an interesting path to joining the Navy.
Yeah. Well, had I not fulfilled my commitment to go on active duty and so forth, I would have ended up in the Navy anyway. But as a sailor, as a probably E1 sailor.
And that's because of the local draft board?
No, the local draft board, actually, I received a draft notice after I was already enlisted in the Navy. And I had to let them know I'm already in the military. So it was my choice, Navy and I always jokingly said, I didn't get in the Army because, one, I get blisters from digging, using a shovel, and I use a left-handed gun, and all guns eject to the right, and it just would hit me in the head.
Wow. Yeah. So we've kind of talked about your youth, your younger years. Now we've talked about your school years. We've talked through your high school. We've talked a little bit through college. But I just want to go back to college. What did you study in college?
I was a math major.
So what did you plan on doing with the math degree if you hadn't joined the military?
More than likely, I would have gone further into engineering, or the other optional route would have been to teach.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. And so obviously you volunteered to join the Navy, and if you hadn't volunteered, you would have been voluntold.
Been voluntold.
Yeah. And so
And that would have been the Army. Because Army needed bodies.
yeah.
And this is I have to say, this is early on at the beginning of Vietnam, before the lottery draft system was put in place.
Okay. Wow. That's interesting. So when you left college, like were you single? What kind of family did you leave behind to join the military?
I got married just after I graduated.
Okay.
And so basically, for that first 4 months, my wife was back actually at that time in Maryland, and I was in Pensacola, Florida. And once I received my commission, she could come down, and she did, and we rented a very small house that really was not, under today's standard, would have been torn down. And that's where we stayed while I was there in further training. And because of many factors, I did not continue in aviation. But then I got orders to go to a show establishment in Great Lakes, Illinois, where I was the division officer for a unit that actually prepared and put together advancement exams for enlisted people in the avionics section. I knew enough about aviation and so forth to supervise that group.
Wow. So you wrote evaluation tests for the soldiers or the sailors coming in.
Advancement exams.
Advancement. Oh, wait a second. So that was like back when you had to pass certain tests in order to reach the next rank.
Right.
Wow. So like, what did you think about that?
Oh, I took it as just as another job. I mean, I knew statistics. I knew which questions had been evaluated. And if questions were not valid, we tossed them out. We tried to use questions that were valid and would stand scrutiny, and yet give a person a fair chance of answering them based on their knowledge and their experience.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. So when you looked at these tests and you reviewed these tests, did any of the questions just kind of like, were they all just like technical in nature? What did they kind of cover?
Most were technical, yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And what other kind of jobs did you have while you were in the Navy?
Well, I got orders from there to report to a ship home ported in Japan. And ostensibly, I was a weapons officer. I went through weapons officer training, and also I went through security crypto training. So my job aboard the ship was multifaceted. And then also, as a line officer, you're expected to be able to navigate and take the con and the deck of the ship and when your time came up. So I did that as well. So I could navigate a ship. I could train people on weaponry, and we had some weapons, shipboard installed weapons on the ship, which probably been useless had we been attacked. But I mean, they were small 3-inch guns, but they had to be, people had to remain proficient in how to track and so forth and use them, as well as all of the hand weaponry and so forth that we carried.
Yeah.
And because I was also had done crypto, I was also the confidential custodian for the materials and ships movements and all that kind of stuff. Not just our ship, but all the ships in the fleet.
Wow. Okay.
So I carried all that stuff.
So that must have been a lot of fun.
It was different. It's different. You know, I can't say it was fun. It was, as I always approach these from the perspective that it's a job. It's a job that I've been assigned to do or I'm trained to do, so you do it. And you do it the best you can.
Wow. So, like, what was the most challenging job that you had while you were in the Navy?
Oh, I can't say challenging. Probably the most different job I had in the Navy was recruiting. I was a recruiting officer too for naval officers at one point, because when I left that ship, I went straight from that ship to another ship. And I thought that my detailer was joking when I got those orders. I even called him and said, hey, wait a minute, this can't be true. Because the orders told me to proceed to Cleveland, Ohio as executive officer of a ship. I'm thinking, that can't be. Navy doesn't have ships in Cleveland, Ohio. Well, the Navy did. It was a ship of the line, still active, but its purpose was to train naval reservists. And that's what we did. It was a relatively small ship. I have to say, leaving the big ship, it was like probably driving, different between driving a big freight truck versus driving a sports car. The smaller ship was like driving a sports car. so it was different.
Okay.
Maneuverability and the whole bit.
Wow. So you had like a lot more autonomy?
No, not necessarily more autonomy, but the ease of navigation and use. I was the executive officer, which meant I was also the navigator. And most of the time, I was the person who was the officer of the deck, basically getting the ship underway and so forth. So I spent a lot of time on the bridge of the ship.
Wow. Cool. So, like, can you talk about like any like really intense times that you had while you were in the Navy?
I would think the most intense time was probably aboard that ship in Cleveland. Because shortly after I reported aboard the ship, we took the ship to the shipyard in Wisconsin. And I don't know if you know it or not, but Lake Erie can freeze over. So can Lake Huron, and you can get ice in Lake Michigan. Well, that's a route you had to leave to go up around to Wisconsin through those three lakes.
Mm.
And that was done. We left to take the ship over to the yard in September. We returned in January. And actually had to have an icebreaker break a path for us coming back.
Wow.
So it just gives you a clue. That's intense. And particularly when you're having to have an icebreaker breaking path for you on Huron and the Trout River and back into Lake Erie. And then we decided, well, we're going to do a little break. That was a different time. Break over into Sandusky, Ohio, coming in the fog and going to anchor. And primarily just by watching the lights, harbor lights, as well as the foghorns, knowing where to drop the anchor. And we did. That was sort of fun, though, to do that.
Wow. Okay. Wow. So, were there any things that you really learned, or were there any lessons that you learned earlier in life that were reinforced by serving in the Navy?
Yeah. I think the most important thing was learning how to respect people. My parents had taught me that. And it's just something I carried over. Well, not just my parents, but my professors and so forth in both high school and college. They tried to teach us to know how to respect people. And you respect people by trying to learn about them in a non-intrusive way and trying to understand where they are with what their lives are about. And most of the time I was able to use that so that I could communicate, share orders that I need to share with the men who worked under me, and still maintain a level of respect both ways. It is not something that the Navy taught. It's not something that I think any military teaches. I think it's just something that you learn by being a human being.
Mm. Wow. So, did you ever run into any challenges with that?
Only, I think I did once. I had a fellow who was from a state in the South who wanted to test my level of authority. And so much so that he was willing to even suggest that at one point I was discriminating against him. And that did not go well with me. It did not go well, period. Because on the way over to the shipyard with that one ship, that after we got to the shipyard, had some people who wanted to take leave, and they were not needed for the repairs, so they could take leave.
Mm-hmm.
And I granted it, as the executive officer did. That was my job. And one fellow wanted to take the leave as we were returning. I said, no, your position is important. You have to be aboard ship. And he did not take that very well.
Mm. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So, were there any like really fun times that you had?
Well, I had plenty of fun times. I was reminded by a high school classmate just recently. We held a high school reunion virtually.
Mm-hmm.
And he remembered an event that I had long forgotten. He remembered still fondly that in Cleveland, Ohio, I had been able to allow for him to park his car at my base so that he could go to a football game, which was across the street. And that was a fun thing for him. And I vaguely remember that event. And it was a good time to be able to share some camaraderie with someone that you know. And that was a fun event.
Wow.
And also one other thing, which is much later, I was able to be involved within a community where I'd got an assignment to be the commander officer of a shore base. And during that time, I was able to facilitate a group of young kids to go to a baseball game. That was really fun.
Wow. Okay, so what was your command like?
I was there for 4 years. I was command officer of a Naval and Marine Corps Reserve Center. There's some still around. Most time you see them. Many of them are new, and we heard one recently up in Maine. That was a problem. But we provided a platform for training of reservists, particularly the weekend ones that came, or those who were there for 2 weeks and so forth. And generally that involved them working with my active duty people to do certain things and to learn and have classes and so forth. So it was a good experience. I was the command officer for 4 years.
Wow. So is that like a long time to be in command, or is that just...
It's about normal. I wanted to get out of there because I wanted to get back to sea, but it didn't happen, and it happened at a very important time in the history of the military, because it was at a time when there was retrenchment of military size in the 70s, early 70s. And they call it RIF, but reduction in force.
Mm-hmm.
And I got caught up in that because I'd already been to Vietnam, back, and the people who were coming back from Vietnam at that time needed a place. So many of those who were stateside and so forth were asked to leave the military. And I was one of those.
Okay. So you mentioned Vietnam. So what did you do in Vietnam?
My ship was one of the ships. It was a supply ship, actually, supply support. It was a rapid support ship. We were the first of our class. And it was commissioned in 1963. I went aboard the ship in 1966. And we supplied all kinds of stuff, including barrels of Agent Orange, which we did not know about at that time, to either the aircraft carriers that were going over and spraying some of this stuff, or the shore establishments, primarily the marine establishments up in Da Nang in that area. We supplied those things, and also other goods and supplies that the ships needed.
Wow. So, like, did you see any, like, activity or action over in Vietnam, or was it a fairly kind of like, transport mission and you were just going from one vessel to the next to do resupply?
One vessel to another, primarily. I know that we were in an area where supposedly we were not at one time, and we were fired on by the Chinese.
By the Chinese?
We were not supposed to be there.
Oh, so it was like one of those boundary lines or something, and it was like, oh, okay, wow, yeah,
And we were supplying another ship that was up there
okay, wow.
at night.
At night, okay, yeah, so it gets better. It gets better. Okay, so resupply at a ship at night in a questionable area, and you receive fire. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So how long were you in Vietnam?
I spent about a year and a half off and on there because we had transit back and forth from Japan and back to Vietnam. In a 112-month period of time, some piece of 11 months, I was in Vietnam.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah. At least some piece of, over a period of 11 months, we were there. At least right off the coast, most of the time. Well, all the time. I never got a chance to set foot on land. I always wanted to do that, but because of my assignment aboard ship, and also I had one other assignment, we carried 2 helicopters, so I was a flight control officer. So I rarely ever got a chance not to be on duty.
Wow. Yeah. So what was it like being the flight control officer on a naval vessel during
Well,
that time?
some days it was interesting because oftentimes because of the inversion, many times our helicopters could not see us. So I had to vector them back to the ship. But I could see them. It's just one of those atmospheric conditions that occur from time to time.
Wow. So you could see the helicopter approaching, but the helicopter couldn't see the vessel because
Right. It could not see us. Wow. Looking down, they were above the layer that
cool.
Scared their vision.
Wow. Yeah. So any other interesting places that you served at or not so interesting places?
Well, I mentioned recruiting. When I left the ship in Cleveland, I was assigned to the recruiting station because that was ashore. Generally, they did seashore. And that was the shortest assignment. So my job there was executive officer for recruiting. I worked for a commander. I was a lieutenant at that time. So my primary focus was recruiting naval officers. Sometimes nurses. Rarely ever did doctors, but primarily nurses and our other people coming through non-ROTC programs, including Academy.
Wow. So what would be your recruiting pitch?
Well, it's very simple. You just go out and do like any other one who posts themselves on a campus and whoever shows up, you talk with them, you interact, and hopefully they can qualify to. And you would give them an exam if they were willing to and had the time to take it.
Wow. So were there any recruits or potentials that kind of stood out?
Yeah. I had special interest in because I was a person of color trying to recruit people of color into the Navy. That was a primary focus of the Navy at that time, is we just need to have a lot more diversity. And plus, I had already done a Navy-wide, not necessarily survey, but some history about the Navy. Hence, I knew about Samuel Small and this type of thing, and about some of the people of color who had contributed to the life of the Navy. And And in that capacity, that was of great interest. So there's always been a piece of my concern is that we not end up with all officers in the Navy coming from privileged Southern white communities.
So, what was your experience like in the Navy being a black naval officer?
Sometimes it was encouraging, other times it was just different. When I say that, is that I recall that my headquarters was in Philadelphia, even though I was stationed in Ohio. And being a commanding officer, you have a command button. I think most military services have a command button that identifies the person wearing it as a commander or something. And a command button in the Navy you wore. And I remember going to Philadelphia, and I was in my uniform with my command button because I was going to go to a conference there. And someone walked past me and heard the mumble, that guy can't be a commander of anything. It happens. It did happen. I did not get that from the captain with whom I was in the conference with, but this was someone else who saw this because their sensitivity was not that a person of color in uniform could be a commander of anything. And at that point in time, I'd been commanding officer at the shore establishment for about 2.5 years. So it was a different experience. But in the community where I was commanding officer, I was accepted by most people in that community. I would get invited to give talks at special occasions and Memorial Day and Independence Day and all these types of things, so it was always a part of it. Heck, I even got invited to become a member of one of the local golf courses. They knew I played golf, but I figured I can't afford to be a member of that club. It was beyond not just my paid rate, but beyond my pay. But I was invited to become a member, and it was a pretty segregated club. I never got a chance to play that course, but at least they invited me to become a member by being a member of the community and having a position in the community.
Wow. So then they accepted you because you were in the community as a leader and not because of who you were?
Right. I would guess some would probably not have accepted me had I not been in uniform.
Yeah. But would you say that would be kind of typical for that time period?
I think it's probably more typical for that time period than not. It's like we can accept a person who presents themselves in a position, but we have great difficulty accepting the person as a person.
Yeah. So do you think that's changed much?
I don't know about the military today. I'm just looking at greater society.
Yeah. Well,
And I think there's still a certain amount of that in greater society. I'm not sure that we've come to the point yet as a people of this in our society who are willing to accept people on the merit of being a person rather than being a thing. And the difference with that is that the position that you're in makes you a thing. The person that you are is who you are. And that's not a thing.
Wow.
Command officer is a thing. Lou Powell is a person. And those are two different entities. They can be merged into one, but those are two different entities.
Wow. So we're going to bounce back a little bit.
Okay.
So when you transitioned out of the Navy, did you have any challenges just being Lou Powell versus the Thing?
Well, I've always been a thing, one or the other. Because when I got out of the Navy, when I basically was ripped out of the Navy, I had made up my mind. Well, I thought maybe I would take a job with a major corporation. I was offered a job with a major corporation. And I just had this nagging thing that I needed to give something back to society.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a call from a person that I knew who said that we need, that's the first thing we need, some math teachers for this high school. Would you consider it? I told him, gee, I haven't been in a classroom in 10 years, or 11 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the last time I was in the classroom was for practice teaching, And he said, never to worry. We have an arrangement with a university. And go there, take some courses. And I said, but you want me in the fall. I didn't tell you the date that I left the Navy. August the 11th, 1974. Significant date. Because someone else left their office the same day. But at any rate, I said that if I'm going to go to the university to take these courses, I don't know if I'm going to meet your deadline. So don't worry. So I took a crash course at 2 universities. And so I was able to be hired, and I taught for 3.5 years. My initial reaction was to teach only 2 years, because I had saved up enough money to support myself, be above and beyond a teacher's salary.
Uh-huh.
And after 3.5 years, it just got to be a little bit too much, because I was working both year round. I was doing summer school, I was coaching and a whole bit, and it just got to be too much. I said, I'm putting a lot of effort in for very low return financially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I figured that I needed to find a different line of business. And so it just so happened that I was reading the paper one day, and this international corporation wanted someone who fit my type of talent skill. And I went, interviewed, and they said, we want you. And so I ended up working for them, initially in marketing and then into clinical research. It was a medical community.
Wow. So what was it like?
That was a time of transition for me, because I had the educational background, the basic background in education, but I'd never taken a medical course. So, so most of my knowledge in that field came from within that company because they had very good training. They had great training, I have to say. As a matter of fact, one physician told me that from his knowledge, that company had the best training of any in the medical community. And I have to agree with him because the training that we received probably was equivalent to about second year medical school.
Wow, that's extensive.
It was very extensive. So I ended up in research after the first couple of years in marketing and stayed in clinical research until I retired. I spent 27 years with that in that field.
Wow. So what company was that?
Well, initially it was American Cyanamid Medical Research, and then they were bought out in the early 90s by Wyeth, and Wyeth was bought out by Pfizer. so it's been, yeah, I mean, all these companies have just gobbled up each other.
Wow.
So I really retired from Wyeth, and of course, because Pfizer bought them out. Pfizer now pays a little bit of my pension.
Wow. That's an amazing journey.
That's not the end of the journey.
Yes, I know. So tell me more.
Well, upon my retirement, actually, technically, it was retirement from Wyeth. I had made up my mind at that time not to, well, I'd already moved to the West Coast from New York. And I made up my mind that, hey, this is it. I will probably do some consulting work. And I did do some consulting work. But someone had approached me and said, hey, you should be an ordained minister in the Episcopal Church. Because I am Episcopalian. And I said to that person, okay, in just a non-committal type way, and said, but I'm going on vacation. And this person said, I'm going to contact the dean of the seminary and set you an appointment. And again, I was, okay. So I went on my vacation for 2 weeks, came back, and lo and behold, they had done that. That was in 1996, just before I retired. And here I am, talking to the dean of the seminary, and next thing I knew, I was in class. So, seminary for 3 years, graduated in 99, ordained in 99. Still not ordained, but and actually I'm married to now for glorious 14 plus years a fellow classmate.
Ooh.
Who was also in seminary at the same time. So, been a great time. But I did do some consulting work even while I was in seminary, and also after I was in seminary in the clinical research field.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, trying to make certain that nobody was killed by a research drug. That's basically what it boils down to. That's what clinical research is all about.
Wow. Okay. So we've kind of talked through your wartime service and all this other stuff, but let's look in just reflections. So as you look back, through your life and through your military service, were there any things that kind of stood out? Was there like any themes, anything that kept popping up time after time after time uh, with your time in service?
Not just the time in service, but in life generally.
Yeah.
Interaction with people. That's the most important thing. How you interact with others, I think, is the most important thing that not only learn, which I learned from my parents, but also that I was able to carry through time in the military and time afterwards. And not let what my pigment deter me from doing what needs to be done.
Hmm.
You know, I didn't use that, I still don't use that as a crutch for anything. Even though I know a lot about the history of this nation, and I've been known to tell some people who are not people of color, I know more about you than you would ever know about me.
Mm.
And that, I try to let that be known, but not in a derogatory way. It's a way of just saying, now let's sit down and share our individual stories.
Wow. That's powerful right there.
Yeah, because if we can share our individual stories, then it's one-on-one, and it takes a long time for that to spread, but it's got to start someplace.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely does. It definitely does. So, if a young person said that they were considering joining the military, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to be certain if that's what you want to do, and pick a branch of service that you think will best give you the opportunity to grow. Not just not a service that has been glorified by movies and TV shows and so forth, but one that give you the opportunity to grow as an individual. And also gives you the opportunity to learn to be a part of a team. Because no one exists individually. Even from my biblical and a religious background, people talk about hermits, but hermits also had people who came and visited them and helped to feed them and so forth. So there's no solitary person in existence because you have to depend on some community.
Mm. So, what would you tell somebody that was like borderline joining the military?
I would say take your time if possible and decide if that's what you want to do. You know, it's not, if you're trying to make up your mind, that means you have time to think about it. It's rare today that a person has to worry about being drafted. During my era, that was a concern. You're going to get drafted or you're going to volunteer. And that's not in the cards today. The options are much more fluid and you have many more opportunities.
Yeah, that is true. So, speaking of opportunities, what kind of opportunities did being in the Navy provide you with?
I can't say that the opportunity it provided me with was an opportunity to learn about other people and interact with other people. I will always go back to this community interaction type thing.
Mm-hmm.
Even though my preference is one-on-one, but it's always learning how to live and deal with other people.
Mm. Mm.
And I would say that my advice to any young person today is you have talent, you have skills, but how do they match up with someone else who has talents and skills?
Okay. So,
And are you able to make that connection with this other person? And if you can make that connection, make it. If you cannot, find someone else or some other way of connecting with someone else.
mm.
My dad used to say, sometimes people are different yokes, which it meant that some oxen cannot work with another oxen, and so they have to be yoked with someone else.
Mm.
He was a major philosopher in that respect.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So is there anything that you'd want people to know in general about veterans, people that served in the military, people that supported the military?
I would say we veterans are people just like anyone else. We have great sensitivities, we have great experiences, and we're willing to share those with other people, given opportunity. And that doesn't mean that you have to stand on the street corner and broadcast. That means being able to sit down with another person and say, hey, I understand you, or I don't understand you. Tell me about you. An example came up. I was recently, I had a couple of surgeries, hand surgeries, and after one of them, I encountered this fellow who's wearing a Korean war cap.
Mm-hmm.
It just so happened that day I was wearing my Vietnam cap. And he walked up to me and said, he didn't know me from Adam. You guys, because of you guys, we now get our benefits. And he thanked me, shook my hand and thanked me. That type of reaction, I could have just ignored him.
Mm-hmm.
But I took time to listen to this guy. And it's a compliment, yes. But I think it made him feel like he was sharing something that had been on his heart to share.
Wow. So can you unpack that a little bit?
Well, apparently, the World War II benefits expired. And for some odd reason, I don't think that the Korean veterans got a very good shake. Some of the things they were able to get, they were able to get some medical and these types of things. But the financial benefits, retirement benefits, and all these types of things were not there for them. And it took a group, the Vietnam era folk,
Mm-hmm.
to raise these questions up, and they were umbrellaed along with the Vietnam era veterans. And some of the Korean veterans are thankful for that. Finally being recognized as being true veterans.
Wow.
You know, most of our focus has always been on World War II veterans.
Yeah.
And more recently, you know, the veterans who Iraq and Iran and Afghanistan. But there's this gap in there of those two war-connected veteran groups that did not receive very much attention until in recent years.
Hmm. Wow. That's very insightful. I never really thought about the Korean War veterans and them not getting that much of a fair shake.
Nobody thinks about them. That's the whole point. That's the whole point. No one's thinking about them.
Yeah, like, wow.
And the question you did not ask me, and I think you did, but the hardest thing for me to do was until recently, about a year ago. I'd never been able to go to the Vietnam War Memorial in D.C., even the traveling one. I just could not bring myself to go there. About a year ago, my wife and I were in D.C. and decided to go to the War Memorial the Vietnam Veterans Wall. You probably know that I lost a cousin there. And finally, with my wife's encouragement and the docent there at the site, I was able to, one, find his name on the wall and just actually go to that wall. A very emotional experience. So I can appreciate the veterans who've gone back to Normandy and what's happened this past week on the 6th. I can appreciate that sensitivity and that emotion that grows out of that. It was hard to do so. But in retrospect, I'm glad we did.
Yeah. So what made it so difficult? What made it hard to do?
I think it was basically that I was emotionally distraught because I'm not sure if I did not think that I was worthy of doing it, but I wanted to honor these veterans, these deceased veterans, in a way that was respectful. And with all of the things that were floating around about veterans, particularly Vietnam veterans, that I just did not feel it, that I should go and be there until I was able to do it. And the docent at the Vietnam Veterans Wall was very helpful in reminding me that you too are a Vietnam veteran.
Mm.
You may not be on the wall, but you're still one of them.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
As a matter of fact, he gave me a 50-year pin.
Nice. So, are there any other things that you would like to share with us? I mean, it's like, I know I asked you a whole bunch of questions. You gave me a whole lot of answers. We've covered a lot of ground and stuff like that. But were there, is there anything, that we haven't talked about that you want to talk about?
Well, I can't think of many things that I just think that the opportunity for people today, male and female, to be sensitive to the needs of their nation. And it's not about being a natural, a patriot or anything. A person who has share in the goods of the nation I believe, shares an obligation to serve the nation in some way. And that's just my strong belief, that's all.
Wow.
And be that it could be service within underprivileged communities, could be service in the military, or service providing guidance and education for young people. Whatever it is, we deserve. I think that everyone should be able to offer something back to the society. That's the reason I went and taught for 3.5 years. I didn't have to. I could have made a heck of a lot more money in a corporation. but that was
doubt.
yeah. But that was the reason I did that. And that's my strong belief. It's not for everyone to do it. Not everyone has to go and teach school or whatever, but something. Be willing to offer something to a nation that's provided you with something.
Okay. So, anything else?
No, I think that's it. One of us or both of us need to go and get some rest.
Yes, that's true. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for sharing with us, and we thank you for volunteering.
Thank you. You're welcome.